When you think of childhood, maybe you think of elementary school, field trips, melty chocolate s'mores, the sound of fireworks, and the wet grass filled with mosquitoes. When I was a child, my parents' house had a pool in the backyard, and my friends and I would make bad home videos. I had blue hair and I always listened to Radio Disney and cuddled my dogs on the outdoor couch because they were not allowed on the indoor couches. But there are some things that I remember that were not good. My father's sudden mood swings, the yelling, my mother never being in the house after I turned 11. As a kid, most of us can think of something that impacted us negatively. A fellow classmate said something about your weight, or maybe your hair, or made fun of your parents' careers. Some of you might not even have parents, or, like myself, maybe half-orphaned. Maybe a teacher said something negative about how overly emotional you were, or you were ignored by your siblings, or you always felt different than everyone else for no unknown reason other than a deep void within your heart. But did you know that adverse childhood experiences can cause long-lasting mental and physical health problems? Okay, you probably won't develop cancer because Bobby took your purple crayon in the 2nd grade, but you might if, on top of losing your purple crayon, your parents got divorced, or you grew up in a household with domestic violence, or you lived in a house where you never felt safe, where your parents constantly put you down, and especially if we're talking about all of them at the same time. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, or the ACEs study as we're going to call it, was approached with one question in mind. What happened to you? It's not, why are you an alcoholic, or why do you indulge in risky behavior, but rather, what happened to you that made you the way that you are now, mentally and physically? The way that we understand ACEs in relation to health now is very new, with the first study coming out in 1998. There are a ton of online tests you can take to determine your ACEs score, and it's really just a 5-minute long 10-question test of yes and no answers, with some of the questions revolving around the experiences you faced yourself, such as sexual abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, and some of them revolving around your environment. For example, parental substance abuse, living with a battered mother, or divorce. It's estimated that most people in America, 2 out of 3 people, have at least a score of 1, and an eighth of the people in America right now have a score of 4 or higher, which having an ACE score of just 1 increases your risk for alcoholism by 3 times, and your risk for suicide by twice as much as people without any ACEs. And that's not even considering the things that are not counted in the ACEs test, like racism, bullying, homelessness, being in the foster care system. People with an ACE score of 4 or higher, which is 1 in 8 people, let me remind you, have a 4 times higher chance of getting COPD, are 2.5 chances more likely of getting hepatitis, and are 12 times more likely to attempt suicide than a person with an ACE score of 0. Not to mention, people with ACE scores of 6 often have autoimmune disorders, are at high risk of cancer, and are much more likely to develop cardiac problems. Before we go any further with this, I want to say that if you have experiences that for you were adverse or negative, if they are not on this test, that does not mean that they were not adverse or negative for you. ACEs are not a means of competition. ACEs aren't something to prove that your life has been terrible or that someone else's hasn't been. Anything that has been traumatic or has caused long-term toxic stress could also put you at risk for any of the negative effects that come with ACEs. And if your terrible negative experiences have not caused trauma or toxic stress, they definitely still suck. But good news for you, your risks for health problems is lower, and that is something to be relieved about. And also, I need to say, if your ACE score is high, it doesn't mean that you're doomed. You're not doomed, I promise. You can live a long, healthy life, and you're gonna be okay. Hello, Internet. My name is Effy, and this is The Human Condition. The subject of ACEs is one I found through a TED Talk, and I found it fascinating. I am someone that is plagued by physical health problems. When I was 17, I started developing numerous autoimmune diseases. Since then, I've lived my life in constant pain, unwell and sick, and it really didn't make a lot of sense for me. Why me, I wanted to know. Like, I was 17, and every year or every few years it was something new. Adult asthma or scoliosis. I didn't understand why my body was so incompetent. I spent my adolescent years perfectly healthy. Learning about ACEs after more than half a decade of being sick and knowing that I'd be sick my entire life was liberating. Like, my body wasn't broken, my body was just tired. It was wonked out, it was confused, it didn't have the chance to grow right. The more I thought of ACEs, the more sense it made, and the more mad I felt because nobody was talking about it. I have lots of friends with high ACEs scores and health issues, and none of us knew about it, and we could have before we got hit by a train of physical ailments. What are ACEs, and what do we know about them so far? The ACEs study was performed by the CDC and Kaiser, the insurance, not the German word for king, which I literally only know because Elle came up to me and was grumbling about, why is your insurance in German? It's so stupid. It was run from 1995 to 1997. Because this study was only done with Kaiser patients, the general demographic was mostly white and mostly college-educated middle class, which is why things like racism, class struggle, gang violence isn't included in our current understanding of ACEs. The study was a questionnaire and asked about all the fun stuff with childhood struggles. Doctors then compared that questionnaire to the subject's current health problems and found a solid correlation between the amount of ACEs you have and your statistical likelihood of getting things like cancer or being on psych meds or of smoking. That's been the only study on the ACEs so far, and the concept in itself is still in its infancy. But one thing is for sure, the things that we go through in our childhood stick with us forever. Trauma is longer lasting than really any of us know. It's said that trauma can be genetic as well. Trauma your grandparents faced can resurface in your DNA. So imagine what the bad things that you, as a child, experienced does to your noggin. The immense amount of changes our brain goes through in 18 short years dictates our personalities for basically the rest of our lives. Things that happen when we're 5 can affect our brain chemistry literally forever. I'm not a doctor, but I am a former Head Start program preschool teacher. And being a Head Start program preschool teacher, part of my job was charting the social, emotional, and cognitive development of all the kiddos I taught. You know what? I can't say the word cognitive. I put a lot of hard words in here that I cannot pronounce, but we're gonna ignore it. We're moving on. I'm not saying it again. When you're 4 or 5 is when most of your social emotional development happens. Imagine what something like household abuse or not having enough to eat could affect your viewpoint of the world around you. At age 3, you start copying adult behavior. What if adults in a child's life isn't modeling healthy behavior? Not only as a children are people's development affected by adversity, but also in adolescent years as well. Around the ages of 13 or 14 is when we, as humans, really develop a sense of individualism and personality. Most of our tastes in things will be set by the time that we're 14, which is probably why I'm still emo at the age of 23. Our personalities are literally forming. There isn't any possible way that your brain isn't changing because of difficult situations. The frontal lobe is developing, which is what helps us see goals long term and helps us curb our impulses. The frontal lobe helps us make rational decisions and makes our emotions less turbulent. Any trauma during that stage can stent or negatively affect the normal growth of the frontal lobe. And ACEs have many ill effects on the body as well. Almost 100% of people with an ACE score of 5 or more are prescribed or have been prescribed antidepressants. 16% of people with 4 or more ACEs struggle with alcoholism, as opposed to about 9% in the general population. 12% of people with an ACEs score of 5 or higher have liver disease, as opposed to the normal national rate of 1.8%. People with a high ACEs score, 4 ACEs or more, are more likely to smoke, more likely to partake in risky behavior, and more likely to be teen parents. If you have an ACEs score of 4 or more, you're about 18 times more likely to attempt suicide. ACEs and mental health in general is a huge aspect of healthcare that is widely misunderstood, ignored, or overlooked even. A lot of it is because of a stigma. It's hard to forget just how new the current mental health system is. When my own parents were young, asylums were literally still a thing. But just recently have we kind of just started understanding our brains and how our brains and mental health literally affects our entire bodies. A public household knowledge of ACEs could transform the landscape of healthcare as we know it. I have heard ACEs described as the biggest health pandemic of our current generation. Not only would we tender our minds because it would be helpful to our own happiness, but also because of our own physical well-being. If doctors knew every single one of their patients' ACEs score from the time they turned 18, it could help them prevent or easier detect diseases that their patients were predisposed to. Okay, cool, you're saying, cognac in one hand and quickly snuffing out your cigarette with the other. But what is the ACEs test, and how do I find out my score? I literally just read your mind right there. Are you impressed? Well, you're in luck, because I'm going to tell you right now. Please don't take this test if you're uncomfortable around trauma-based topics, because it is a test based around trauma. The test is just 10 questions, and every question is a yes or no. Every yes on the test is a point, and the number of points you have at the end is your ACEs score. Fun stuff. Let's do it. A childhood trauma pop quiz, just what you came here for. Also, just a little disclaimer, it is recommended that you take all psychological tests with a mental health professional, but just like depression or anxiety, diagnostic sheets, this is really just about how you feel. So do what you feel is right. Also, I promise you won't need a piece of paper or anything for this test. Unless you can't count to 10, then no promises. Again, I'm not your mom, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but seriously, I wouldn't bring you here to make you take a test that's hard. Probably, I don't know, don't quote me on that. Anyway, the questions are... Number 1, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you? Or act in any way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? Did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you? Or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Question number 3 is, did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you or have you touch their body in a sexual way? Or attempt to actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? Question number 4 is, did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special? Or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Question number 5 is, did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you? Or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or to take you to the doctor if you needed it? Question number 6 is, were your parents ever separated or divorced? Question number 7 is, was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her? Or sometimes, often or very often, kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes or threatened with a gun or a knife? Question number 8 is, did you live with anyone that was a problem drinker or alcoholic or who used street drugs? Question number 9 is, was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? And question number 10 is, did a household member go to prison? Okay, I'm going to give you a minute to calculate your scores and the process. Breathe in and breathe out. Good job. Okay, we did math and listened, and now hopefully we all know our ACEs scores. But, you say, wiping tears from your eyes, because that test was a lot, and I'm not crying, you're crying. And you know what? It's totally fine, because hard stuff sucks. Why does our ACEs score matter now? I had already experienced that stuff, and now I'm 18 or older, so what does that mean? And here's the thing, I get that, and I get that, looking at everything you're at risk for only really seems like a bummer, and not really something to learn from. But hear me out. knowing your ACEs is important for you because you can know what you could be at risk for, and you can warn your doctor. Or if you show signs of any symptoms, you can bug them until they listen to you, which, trust me, I know can be a pain. This is a verified statistic that you can help use as a tool to keep your health in check, or to notify others to keep your health in check. If you have children, knowing their ACEs score can help you keep their health in check. It could be liberating, knowing why things are happening, or knowing why your body is the way that it is. And you can tell other people, who can tell their friends, who can tell their doctors, until doctors realize that this is something that they need to take seriously. ACEs don't have to mean doom. Some people have high ACEs scores and they're fine. They're not sick, and that calls to question why. Why don't ACEs affect us all the same? There is an answer to that question, actually. Along with the ACEs score, there's something called a resilience score. When life gets hard, most of us have buffers, a shield between you and your adverse experience that makes it less like an earthquake and more like a fender bender. These buffers could include things like a good support system, a safe place to talk to, parental love. It can be internal, like optimism or having something that you're really, really good at, or something that you just enjoy. Just like ACEs aren't definitive, buffers aren't either. And buffers can look different for everyone. Some people form parental relationships with other people, or you can be recognized for your writing, or art, or academia. Understanding ACEs means understanding buffers, and understanding buffers could help us provide them to the youth that needs them. Currently, our healthcare system is overwhelmed, and not just because of our current situation with Miss Rona. The amount of people now with disabilities or chronic illness seems like it's the highest that it's ever been, and it doesn't have to be. Lowering the impact of ACEs would lower the amount of health crises Americans see. Alrighty. I'm sure you guys are tired of learning, even though I'm really, really good at explaining things, so I don't know what's up with that. But I guess I should get to why I gathered you all here today. I am really an ongoing learner. I like learning about everything, and that's cool, but it's not like what I learn is really applicable. I'm more of a theorist, if we're being honest. Right after I learned about ACEs was the beginning of quarantine. It was the crux of everyone being inside their houses, aka the only time I've ever gone to a grocery store without anxiety. And I was day drunkenly sending my friends all of these intrusive quizzes like the ACEs score quiz and yes, the Enneagram. My friend Christy had the same ACEs score as I do. I also made Elle take the test, of course, and his score is a big fat 0. And she made her fiance take the test, and he had a score of a 1 or a 2. And my brain, crunked up on isolation, thought that it was interesting that both of us had the same pattern in our relationship. I consider myself an amateur scientist, meaning I ask people questions, make correlations, and kind of guesstimate my way to a conclusion. And that's really what I wanted to do with love and childhood trauma, because, like I said, trauma affects so many aspects of our lives. And I wanted to know how ACEs affect personal relationships, specifically romantic ones, including my own. Listen, I'm sorry this episode is a short one. I'm just a 23-year-old girl with a microphone. I really can't go into detail about ACEs as much as someone that knows what they're talking about, unfortunately. But I promise this series is a good one. I'm excited. I feel like this is a trailer for the good stuff, but you know what? I'm cool with that. Thanks for listening. If you're listening and you've gotten this far, I love and appreciate you always. If you want to keep up with everything THC, which, side note, maybe I also like the name The Human Condition because its acronym is THC and my brain is 12. Anyway, no, that's not what I wanted to say. What I wanted to say was, if you want to keep up with everything The Human Condition, you can follow us basically anywhere at The Human Pods. That's the little app thingy with the words The Human Pods. I post a lot of fun stuff on there. Sometimes, if I remember. If you have a story that you want to share, you can email us at thehumanpods@gmail.com. And of course, if you want to ruin your feed, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Ephemerality, spelled with an I instead of a Y at the end. That's EPEMERALITI. Last week I spelled it wrong, but it's fine. You guys can probably spell better than I can, so what's to be expected? Anyway, thanks for listening. See you guys later. Bye.